Salut! Tonight's lesson is all about the verb avoir. We haven't learned any verbs so far this year, so this is going to be a little bit of a new concept and require a little bit of extra information. On your notes, you'll see that the first box basically explains how the verb avoir works in English. Basically, the verb avoir means to have, so it's going to talk to you about how the word to have works in English. This should seem pretty basic to you, but it's something that you kind of need to understand in order to then understand how it works in French. So in English, the verb to have has only two different forms in the present tense. You either say have or you say has. And the way you change that is based on what the subject of your sentence is. So if you're talking about how I own something or have something, you use the word have. I have two older brothers is the example on your paper. But if you change the subject from I to a different subject, such as Lucy, or any girl's or boy's name for that matter, you don't say Lucy have a new backpack, you say Lucy has a new backpack. And then again, you'll switch back to the word have if you change it up and use the subject we, such as we have math homework, or in this case, we always have math homework. Either way, the switching of the verb tends to be something that comes natural in your native language because you've heard it so many times. You don't generally have to think to yourself, okay, I'm using a singular feminine subject such as Lucy, so now I have to use has, or I'm using the plural version of we, and now I have to use have. It just sounds weird to say things like I has two older brothers, or Lucy have a new backpack. But you have to kind of get away from that and understand that you're changing it to make it match the subject to be able to make this make sense in French. The other thing that they mention here are negative statements in English, and we've kind of touched base on this before with the French language, but just in case that we kind of need some clarification. Again, in the English language, to make something negative, you add the words do not or does not, or of course you can use those same contractions such as doesn't or don't. Basically, instead of saying I have a cell phone, you put the word don't in front of it. I don't have a cell phone, and things like that. The reason why we need to talk about how it works in English is it makes it slightly more easy to understand now how it works in French. So again, go ahead and fill in. The verb avoir is the French form for to have. The difference between French and English is it's not simple as ordering one version of the word avoir for meaning the word have and another version for the word has. Instead, they have 6 different forms. Now, it does still change based on the subject, so you have to be familiar enough with your French subjects and know which form matches with which subject, so you don't walk around saying the French equivalent of I has two older brothers. So let's go ahead and get those forms now. The je form, or the I form of have, is j'ai. So j'ai means I have. You've seen this before when we talked about our ages. Technically, when you said something like j'ai 14 ans, you were saying I have 14 years. They just say their age a little differently in French. The tu, or the you form, is a. Tu as then altogether means you have. So you can use this to say something very simple, like with the classroom objects. Tu as un livre. You have a book. The il and elle form, the he and she form, is a. So if you want to say he has a book, il a un livre, or she has a book, elle a un livre. The nous form of have is avons. Again, you just kind of use that whenever you're using nous or the we form to say we have. So if you wanted to say something such as we have a book, you would say nous avons un livre. The y'all form of have is avez, or the vous form of have is avez. If you wanted to say something, y'all have a book, you would say vous avez un livre. And then the they form, whether it's they boys, they girls, or they mixed, the ils and elles form is ont. So if you want to say they have a book, ils ont un livre. Basically, these are the really important things that you need to memorize in the next couple of weeks before the test happens, because on the test I'll be expecting you to be able to provide the form of avoir given a particular subject. So if I want you to complete a sentence such as they blank a book and you need to fill in the right form of have, you'll need to know that the they or the ils form is ont. I will give you a song to help you memorize this in class, and we'll watch a video about it, but for now, just kind of be aware that that's really the most important part of this lesson. The second most important part of this lesson, besides just memorizing these, is actually knowing how to apply them. So if you have something such as this first sentence here, basically you're wanting to say, we have a super French teacher. I like previewing some of these examples. They're pretty good ones. Either way, if you want to say we have, You can't say nous avoir. Avoir in its original state means to have, and you don't want to walk around sounding silly by saying things like, we two have a super French teacher. Just like in English, you don't say to have, you change the verb to have to make it match the subject. So in English, you say we have. In French, the way you use the we form of avoir is by filling in, just like you see on the chart up there, avons. Nous avons un prof de français super means we have a super French teacher. If you had by chance used one of the other forms because you had gotten confused, let's say you said something like nous ont un professeur de français super. It's the English equivalent of saying we has a super French teacher. Just doesn't match up quite well. People will still kind of understand what you're saying, but you'll sound a little silly. So then the next sentence that's an example. A lot of you guys are already catching on and probably looking up a chart and you're going, wait a second. I don't see a Dominique form of has. I don't see a Dominique form of avoir. How am I supposed to know which form it is if it's not on the chart? Keep in mind that Dominique is a girl's name. And just like we've been talking, you could always use the word elle or the word she instead of a girl's name. So if you want to use the correct form of have with Dominique, to say that Dominique has 30 years, which I know sounds very strange, the Dominique or the elle form of have is a. Dominique a 30 ans. Dominique has 30 years. Same thing happens here. If you go to look at your chart to figure out the Tom and Hugo form of avoir, or the way you say have for a subject such as they or Tom and Hugo, you won't see Tom and Hugo on your chart. You have to realize that Tom and Hugo are two males, which, like we've been talking about for weeks now, means you can use the subject pronoun ils instead of their two names. And once you figured that out, you'll know that the correct form of avoir is ont. Again, if you were to fill in a different form of avoir, it would be the equivalent of saying Tom and Hugo has 28 posters instead of saying Tom and Hugo have 28 posters. So the subject and the verb have to agree with each other in the French language. It just doesn't come naturally to you just yet. You'll have to check your chart a lot. The last thing I want to touch on, like I said earlier, is that bit that's actually a repeat from some earlier videos, but how you can make a sentence negative. So instead of saying, we have a super French teacher, going ahead and insulting me a bit and saying, we don't have a super French teacher. I've said this before in a video, there are two magical words in the French language that will make things negative, and those are the words ne and pas. You put ne in front of the verb and pas after the verb, and it changes it from being that is a affirmative verb to a negative verb. So they're giving you two examples here. The first one, instead of saying je m'appelle Enzo, my name is Enzo, if you put the ne and pas around the naming part, instead of saying my name is Enzo, you're saying my name is not Enzo. Now they do point out to you that if you have a ne followed by a vowel, like in this case, instead of saying Marie ne a pas 12 ans, they really don't like the sound of two vowel sounds next to each other, so they'll go ahead and drop that E off, just like we do in the contractions. Instead of saying do not, we say don't. Same kind of idea. They drop the E off and they put an apostrophe there and kind of blend it all together. Either case, instead of saying Marie a 12 ans, Marie has 12 years, as in Marie is 12 years old. When you put that ne pas in there, it changes it and makes it Marie is not 12 years old. We'll definitely be talking about this more in class, but for now, if you need to rewind and repeat anything, go ahead and make sure you bring your notes to class with you.